Hello and welcome to tonight's webinar. Our webinar tonight is titled Ingredients to Successful Modeling, SMoRRES and Partner-Augmented Input. My name is Stephanie Meehan and I'm your facilitator for this evening's webinar. Tonight's program is brought to you by the U.S. Society for AAC, or USSAAC, the voice of AAC. Thanks to the USSAAC Education Committee and to Isaac for making this possible. USSAAC is thrilled with the response to tonight's topic. We have over 100 people registered. We hope you will join USSAAC by going to www.ussac.org/membership. Our new membership year began January 1st, 2018. Early registration for our webinars is a member benefit, especially helpful when our webinars are very popular like this one. Another member benefit is a substantial reduction in registration for the biannual Isaac Conference this year in Gold Coast, Australia. Go to www.isaac-online.org to learn more about this fabulous opportunity. I have to let you know that my disclosure statement for the evening, I have no relevant financial or non-financial relationships to the content of this webinar. So just some logistics for tonight. Your microphones will be muted. You can ask questions by typing into the question box in the lower right-hand corner of your screen. Questions will be answered as time allows, and especially in the last segment of the webinar. We may group together questions that are similar. We ask that you pose your question in a general fashion rather than related to a specific individual. Questions that are not responded to during the webinar may be answered afterwards via email. Some notes about the continuing education credit. The ASHA CEU participant form and certificate of attendance can be found at www.isaac-online.org/English/news/webinars. You must stay for the duration of the webinar in order to receive credit, and our webinar platform lets us see who is on and for how long. Registrants will receive a follow-up email that provides the link to the archive, CEU form, and instructions. There is no charge to USSAAC members for ASHA CEs. CEs are $25 for non-members. And please make sure that you scan and send your participant form to me at smeehan8@ku.edu. And that date's actually incorrect. It'll be March 29th, 2018. And if you have any questions about that, you can email me. You should be seeing that on your screen now. So tonight, we're thrilled to have our speakers. Our speakers tonight are Jill Senner, PhD, CCC, SLP. She is a speech-language pathologist with 20 years of experience working with children with complex communication needs. She is the owner and director of Technology and Language Center, where she specializes in providing augmentative and alternative communication and assistive technology services, including assessment, consultation, and training, and workshops and lectures. Dr. Senner has presented at numerous national assistive technology conferences and has taught graduate courses in AAC and swallowing disorders. She has published research in the areas of AAC siblings and disability and swallowing disorders and cerebral palsy. We also have Matthew R. Baud, MSCC CSLP. He has been working with AAC for the past 14 years. He currently is the Assistive Technology Coordinator at Niles Township District for Special Education, performing evaluations, trainings, and coaching communication partners. Matthew also has his own AAC private practice, working with individuals with complex communication needs from birth through adulthood. He is an adjunct professor at St. Xavier University, where he teaches a graduate course in AAC and has presented at national and state conferences. Matthew has also published research in the areas of AAC. Welcome, Jill and Matthew. Thank you for being here, and I will turn it over to you.
Hi, thank you so much for having us. I'm Jill Senner.
And I'm Matthew Baud. There we are.
And tonight we will be talking about ingredients to successful modeling, SMoRRES and Partner-Augmented Input. We do have a couple of quick disclosures that we want to share. I am the owner and director of Technology and Language Center Incorporated, and we do provide services and products related to Partner-Augmented Input and communication partner instruction in AAC. And Matt also has a private practice where he provides similar services and products. We have no relevant non-financial relationships to disclose.
Typically, we use the Kent Walsh McNaughton 8-step model to instruct families and school staff in partner-augmented input. However, due to time constraints of this webinar, this evening we will only have time for the strategy description and some strategy demonstration. If you wish to learn more about PAI following the completion of this video, it's recommended that you complete the remainder of the steps listed here for maximum benefit.
So, being an effective communication partner or AAC facilitator is not intuitive. It often requires one to change long-established unconscious ways of communicating. This is a quote from past president of USSAAC, Sarah Blackstone. But I think that this is something that is really important for us to think about, that learning how to communicate using AAC is not something that is always natural to many communication partners, such as school staff or family members.
And we know when we look at communication partner instruction, training an AAC user's significant communication partner, the parents, teachers, teacher aides, friends, can be of great benefit in increasing participation in daily interactions by individuals using speech-generating devices.
And there's consistent evidence in the literature that communication partner instruction not only improves the skills of communication partners, but also has a positive impact on the communication of people who use AAC.
And communication partner trainer can be used effectively as an intervention strategy for individuals using AAC.
So one of the things that we think about when we are working with individuals who are using AAC is family training and school staff training and communication partner training in general. And one of the things that we frequently instruct communication partners to do is partner-augmented input. And this is a great graphic that Rachel Langley shared. The finish line is just the beginning of a whole new race. Simply getting a communication board or device is just the start of a journey in beginning to learn how to communicate with it.
And here's a picture of my 11-year-old when he was about 3 months old. And let's think about how he was learning language.
Well, typically, infants don't get direct instruction in language. We don't usually sit down with an infant and say, dog, noun, a domesticated carnivorous mammal. No, rather, instead we say things like, look at the dog, he feels so soft. Let's pet the dog. The dog is barking. That's loud. And by talking about the dog in the context of the dog, and incidentally, this is my incredibly adorable puppy, Fado, we talk about this with our kids, and through experiential learning and repetition of the word dog in context, kids begin to learn the meaning.
And here's a picture of my 8-year-old when he was about 6 months old. And while he was playing with his toys, we talked and we talked, but we knew that he didn't understand everything we were saying, but we kept on talking. And that's important because we want to make sure beginning communicators don't always understand all the vocabulary, but we need to introduce them to new vocabulary if they're going to learn how to use that vocabulary.
And this is Matt's youngest, Josephine, when she was just a couple days old. And I can attest to the fact we were actually at a conference shortly after she was born. And even at that very young age, Matt was FaceTiming with her and talking to her continuously. And this is a quote from the website listed below. From the moment a baby is born, they hear and respond to the spoken word. We bombard that infant with language for the first 12 to 18 months of their lives. During that time, we do not expect that they will utter a single understandable word.
So then why do we expect a child to spontaneously start using AAC from the first moment they get it?
Simply giving a child a board or device does not automatically make him or her a communicator. any more than giving me a basketball makes me an athlete. Matt always laughs at this one, stop. And or giving me a piano makes me a musician. I will say that if we look at the communication symbol on your screen, this is what many communication symbols look like to the children who we are working with. Now, we have the benefit of being able to read the words on a child's board. Some of the individuals we work with are able to read those words as well, but many of our young children aren't able yet to read the words, and this is what they see. So we often ask people to guess what this symbol might mean. And I just want you to, at home, take a minute to kind of think about what your guess might be if you don't already know what this is. But we've heard lots of things: put in, push down, and typically people don't understand the meaning of the symbol until we explain it to them. This is a symbol for every. There's an arrow pointing to every box.
AAC users also need and deserve a period of learning from models of others. This modeling can and should be done by parents, peers, siblings, professionals, and others on a regular basis for an extended period of time. And the graphic on the right from the System of Aware's Do's and Don'ts of AAC from 2015 really sums up what we're talking about today. Do use the AAC system to talk yourself. Don't expect the AAC user to communicate without you modeling how.
And Dowd and Gorey wrote an interesting paper that was talking about the use of partner-augmented input in an extended school year classroom. And they really were talking about it as being an immersion environment. And this is a quote from that particular paper. It is recommended that classroom instruction include the child's targeted AAC language to promote the child's understanding of the symbol and the referent.
So let's go into the what is partner-augmented input. Partner-augmented input, PAI, really sometimes referred to as natural aided language modeling, aided language stimulation, sometimes AAC modeling. Just depends on the literature that you're reading, but it all means the same thing. It's a modeling strategy where communication partners themselves are using the AAC systems by pointing to the symbols on the board and device while simultaneously talking.
And in a new paper by Allen et al., they indicated that augmented input can be broadly defined as an umbrella term for systematic modeling input from two or more modalities, one of which must include the learner's AAC system. So when we think about this, what often comes to mind is something similar to a total communication classroom, where we might have a teacher who is simultaneously talking and signing at the same time. In this case, the communication partner, whether it be a school staff member or a family member, is simultaneously talking and pointing to communication symbols on the board or device.
And how is it provided? Well, the communication partners, whether it's the school staff, a pair, a sibling, a parent, they use the visual language themselves by pointing to the symbols on the communication board and device while talking.
And we know the importance of evidence-based practice, and there is actually quite a bit of evidence. There have been quite a number of research studies that have looked at the effectiveness of providing partner-augmented input. The first, by Dada and Allant in 2009, found that partner-augmented input increased vocabulary comprehension.
We found it to find increases in symbol comprehension and production.
Provides models for appropriate language and communication.
Provides children with a model for how AAC can be used, in what context and for what purposes. Reinforces the effectiveness of using the system. The children experience that utility and power. And it makes really explicit statement to children that AAC provides an acceptable vehicle for communicating.
It is an effective method to teach early syntactic relations.
Increases production in multi-symbol messages and can improve utterance length and complexity.
Increases responsiveness and use of AAC.
And increases in use in morphemes such as past tense, ED, plural S.
So lots of good research on partner-augmented input that suggests that it is an effective strategy. And one of the things that I do want to point out, we don't have time to go into each of these particular studies, in detail today, but these studies have been done on individuals with a variety of different disabilities, a variety of different age ranges, and many of them have found similar results. A more recent study that was done by Amaral et al. Found that using an SGD with an effective naturalistic developmental behavioral intervention may facilitate longer and more frequent reciprocal communication interactions, leading to gains in verbal and non-linguistic communication skills. And they particularly were focusing on young children between the ages of 5 and 8 years with autism. In the speech-generating device group, significant differences were seen in spontaneous communication utterances and initiating joint attention. And I want to point out that the joint attention is really something that is very important. You know, without having that joint attention, without having engagement, you know, we very often don't have learning occurring. Kids need to be engaged to be gaining benefit from the things that we're doing and we're saying. And we have heard various individuals in the past say things like, well, joint attention is a prerequisite to augmentative and alternative communication use. And this study just illustrates that not only is it not a prerequisite to using a speech-generating device, but using a speech-generating device along with naturalistic types of interventions can actually improve joint attention.
And so they suggest that the gains made by children could be explained by the therapist modeling the speech-generating device use with or without the child SGD use.
There were also recently a couple of systematic reviews that came out that had very interesting results. Senner et al. Put out a systematic review in 2016, and they indicated that the results of the review indicated AAC modeling intervention packages led to meaningful linguistic gains across 4 areas, including pragmatics, marked by increases in communicative turns, semantics, marked by receptive and expressive vocabulary increases, syntax, marked by multi-symbol turn increases, and morphology, marked by increases in targeted morphology structures. Allen et al. Were a little bit more guarded in their conclusions, but they still found that this particular technique was a promising technique for use in individuals with developmental disabilities and apraxia of speech.
And we provide partner-augmented input to establish that solid receptive base upon which our child's device is built upon, the language they have. And our expectation is that eventually expressive language will follow. But with the child, we're not forcing them to use their device. They're not required. We're encouraging them during our interactions. And the graphic to the right is from Caroline Musselwhite. It really talks about downward demands and upward invitations. And we're going to talk a little bit later today about ways that we can invite those communication opportunities so we're not requiring them, but we are encouraging them.
And I love this graphic by Rachel Langley. AAC is not a test. You know, think about all the things that we do when we're communicating. We're sharing, we're refusing, we're joking, we're complaining, questioning. We're doing lots of other things. And so, again, this just emphasizes that we want to be encouraging individuals to use their devices during our interactions, but again, not requiring. And there was a study that was done by Siller and Sigmund in 2002 that found that caregiver utterances that were both synchronized with the child's focus, so again, following the child's lead, encouraging some of that joint attention and engagement, are undemanding in quality, are correlated with better language development overall.
Hey, Jill?
Yes?
So sorry to interrupt, but would you mind defining joint attention for the audience, please?
Yeah, typically when we're talking about joint attention, we're talking about engagement in which both a child and an adult are focused on the same thing and interacting together around a particular activity or around a particular communicative opportunity, where there is engagement, where the two individuals are referencing each other as well as the activity that's occurring.
Linda Burkhardt talks about avoid using man models, in which the expectation is that the child will say what we want them to say it. And her visual on the right from Rachel Maddow really kind of brings us into it about saying inspire, but don't require.
And our colleague, Kathleen Post, with whom we've done some of our more recent research on parent instruction in partner-augmented input, frequently can be heard saying compliance is not communication. So if someone is producing an utterance because we're telling them, tell me more, or pointing to it or taking their hand and touching a button, that is not the same thing as communication. Communication is authentic, spontaneous sharing of thoughts and ideas. So that is really what we hope to gain by providing partner-augmented input. And there are also some research studies that have been done that look at prompting. And one of the things that I wanted to point out was a study by Biederman et al. From 1998, an oldie but a goodie. But they note that current teaching practice, which employs hand-over-hand modeling combined with frequent verbal and gestural prompting, may limit the effectiveness of modeling in atypical learners. And this was not specifically designed to look at learning of augmentative communication, but I think is very interesting nonetheless. They actually found that passive modeling, so an adult modeling without necessarily taking the child's hand and then making them produce what they wanted them to do, was overall significantly more effective than hand-over-hand modeling.
And here are some positive benefits of using partner-augmented input that Gail Van Tatenhove suggests about slowing down the partner speech rate. Jill and I always talk about this. We know we talk really fast in a lot of different situations, but by pointing on the communication board or device, it slows down our speech rate. It also shortens our sentence lengths and focuses more on those keywords and idea. We match more of the language level that our child that is using AAC is currently using, and just adding a little bit more to what they are currently doing themselves.
It also emphasizes gaps in core vocabulary. I cannot tell you how many times I've gone to model something on a communication device and looked for a word and thought, huh, the word more is missing. How interesting, you know? By going to model, I can realize what language might be missing from a child's device, and then the team can make sure that we add any necessary vocabulary to that communication system so that the child really does have a robust core vocabulary.
It shifts talking by the teacher from that referential questioning to more of that commenting and modeling. Really, we're talking about that descriptive teaching method that we're not going to talk a lot about today in our webinar, but it gives us a great way, whether you're at home, you're in a classroom, to talk about the language that's available on our robust systems, because there's a lot of fringe in a classroom. There might be some fringe at home. We want to look at ways of modeling and using the language that our kids have.
Yes, definitely. Teaching with the available vocabulary, with the understanding that both core vocabulary and fringe vocabulary is important to include on a communication system. But it also builds natural support networks. The other thing that we all frequently hear when we go into classrooms is, the child knows the device better than I do. And sometimes I've actually even overheard instructors asking a child where something is on the device. Oh, I know you know where that is. Where is your weather on your communication device? Well, when we start modeling, we actually learn the device as well or better than the child. And that's really a goal in order to be able to learn new vocabulary. Again, as we said very early on, the child needs to be exposed to words that he or she doesn't already know. So we become natural support networks when we learn the language as well or better than the student does.
Carol Goossens talks about, to become a proficient user of an AAC system, the child must undergo a substantial portion of his or her training within the many environments in which she or he is expected to communicate. And this is something we always talk around with our parents and our classroom staff. It has to go beyond snack. It has to go beyond calendar time. We have to make sure that we're using it throughout their day, expand it into the community, into those non-instructional times in the classroom. Just expand the options of modeling and using the device.
And Carol Goossens, continued to say, furthermore, to achieve mastery, the child must be inundated with seeing the system being used frequently, interactively, and generatively. In short, to maximize acquisition, augmentative communication training is best conducted with an immersion approach. And what do we think about with an immersion approach?
Learning a second language?
Definitely. As a matter of fact, in my very first day of French class, when I sat down in my seat, as soon as the bell rang, my teacher announced, "Pas d'anglais," no more English. And for the entire rest of the class period, she continued to teach us in French with lots of gestures and lots of modeling to try to teach us what the language was. But when we think about an immersion approach, we really think about learning a foreign language.
So we must start thinking about viewing AAC training as learning that second language, being very similar.
And when a child is learning a second language, it is very helpful for those around the child to know that second language as well. So what do we know about second language acquisition?
Well, we can look at these terminologies that we have out there. Basic interpersonal communication skills. These are the social language we can have. We can barter at a market. We can talk at a restaurant, in the cafeteria. We can ask questions. And it gives us that language back and forth, but it can take us 2 to 3 years to achieve that proficient if we're in a very supportive environment. And we highlight supportive environment, being fully immersed in it. And again, we can even look at it, the fact that we don't have, this is for studies that was with individuals that don't have other sensory, physical, cognitive needs. So we know it can take much longer.
And one of the things that I will say is that I do have basic interpersonal communication skills in French. I can order in a restaurant, I can ask for directions, I can make small talk in a taxi. But what I don't have is cognitive academic language proficiency. That actually takes 5 to 7 years to achieve and requires a level of complexity with language well beyond the basic interpersonal communication level. So, for example, talking about augmentative and alternative communication, talking about speech and language, these are things that didn't come up in my introductory French textbooks. These are things that I would really have to do more intensive instruction in order to be able to perform in my second language.
Language learning is bimodal. AAC users hear and they understand language in an auditory environment, but produce language in part 3, visual mode. So let's take a look at our little girl here and see how we have that disconnect between input and output, or sometimes been referred in literature as asynchrony.
Yeah, if we just have speech in, but we expect the child to produce their communication in pictures, there is a disconnect. There's the asynchrony. But if we have speech and pictures in, then we have a more compatible environment for the child being able to produce utterances using a speech generating device.
And here's another quote from Baud and Gorey, if you remember them from their immersion extended school year program quote we had before. And it says, often familiar and unfamiliar communication partners use an oral language with an individual learning AAC-based language. In this sense, the dichotomy requires the AAC user to code switch between a verbally symbolic language system and a visually symbolic language system.
And this can result in communication breakdowns. I often see this. I have clients who I will be talking to them about something, and they will actually point to their device and make kind of an I don't know gesture, trying to say, I know what I want to say, but I don't know where it is in the device. And so if I'm able to model that for the child, then the child will learn where that language is. So the next time that topic comes up, the child is able to communicate using their speech generating device.
And the impact of that input-output asymmetry really affects a lot of different areas of language production, including semantics, morphology, and syntax development. And AAC competency takes time. We understand this, and this is a quote we've seen in a lot of different areas. The average 18-month-old child has been exposed to 4,380 hours of oral language at a rate of 8 hours per day from birth. A child who has a communication system and receives speech and language therapy 2 times per week for 20 to 30-minute sessions will reach the same amount of language exposure in 84 years. And we haven't done the math on that, but it really does highlight the importance of making sure that we can model frequently in a lot of different environments.
And not just speech therapy. No one has 84 years to learn how to be an effective communicator.
So that takes us to our modeling ingredients of how to provide this modeling and partner-augmented input. And our first ingredient that we have here is slow speech rate. Again, we know when we model, it does slow us down, but we want to make sure that we do speak in that slow and that clearly articulated manner.
We also want to model, but what exactly makes up modeling? Well, we say words or phrases that are related to the contextual information available while pointing to pictures on a child's board or device. For example, while looking at a book about a dog, the adult might say, I see a dog, I like dogs. And there are a couple of different speechy strategies that we know we typically use to expose children to language, known as parallel talk and self-talk. And these come in really handy when adults are trying to think about what to model.
And we look at parallel talk, right? Describing those ongoing interests of the child. As they're doing it, they're putting the blocks on, they're talking about that language. And we can look at self-talk, describing those actions, the interests of us as you're doing it, the adult themselves. As you're putting in the CD in the radio, you're putting on the iPad, you're giving the language. And these techniques are really helpful because it gives us that comment language we want to use instead of always asking those yes-no questions that are so unnatural.
And I do want to point out, you know, parallel talk really is kind of like doing the color commentary for what a child is currently engaged in. So if a child is building with blocks, we can talk about what the child is seeing, hearing, doing in the moment. And we can do the same with ourselves when we do self-talk. So we think about it as being a color commentator for what our students are doing.
The next ingredient that we're going to talk about today is respect and reflect. This is that idea of providing the words to code the child's feelings, the wants, and intended messages. So if the child communicates something through a different mode of communication, whether it's a gesture, a sign, a word approximation, we want to make sure that we model that same word or phrase without making them use it on the device. We want to make sure that we don't say, hey, tell me on your talker. So if you're walking down the hallway and you see the child clearly point to the water fountain, we know what they want. They want a drink. So instead of saying, tell me on your talker, we'll say, well, model, want drink, drink, I'm thirsty.
Yeah, and respect and reflect, I think, is another really important point when we're talking about engagement, when we're talking about really honoring all forms of communication. And this kind of goes back to some of, you know, strategies that communication partners might have developed prior to the use of an augmentative communication device. You know, most of us are multimodal communicators. We use gestures, we use vocalizations, we might point to things on occasion. We use all different modes of communication to get our message across. And all of them are valid and all of them are important. And so when we respect what a child is saying, it shows them that their words have meaning. However, we also want to be able to teach AAC, so we also do the reflect component. We also model it on the communication device.
And when we look at Dodd and Gore's quote here, following the child's leads enables communication guide to respond to all the child's communicative attempts. This demonstrates to the child that his or her language has meaning while providing AAC language model. And we know most of our kiddos that are using AAC is not going to be the only mode that they're currently going to use. They might use sign, they might use those approximations. So we want to make sure we don't say tell me on a talker, because that can be very frustrating to our kiddos. Rather, let's go ahead and acknowledge them and show that their language does have some meaning for them. So when they do encounter somebody that doesn't understand those gestures, they have a way to show them and repair those breakdowns.
And I will say I have seen the effects of respect and reflect not being done, or having all communication not being honored. And I'll give you an example. There was a young lady who, this is many, many years ago, had a variety of different communication symbols on her very limited speech generating device at the time, including yes and no. But she had vocal approximations and also really appropriate gestures for yes and no, shaking her head and nodding. And she was asked if she had wanted a snack by a communication partner, and she said, yeah. And the communication partner then said, tell me on your talker, at which point the young lady spat on her device and threw it on the floor, which really was just demonstrative of the extreme level of frustration that she had when she was being asked to repeat something that she had already really clearly indicated to someone. We don't want, as communication partners, to be disingenuous about misunderstanding students simply for the purpose of getting them to use the communication device. In therapeutic settings, there are times where we might do things like sabotage or use other strategies where we might, be expecting the child to produce something with a communication device. But in naturalistic engagements or interactions with family members or with school staff, we, again, don't need to be quizzing all the time.
Our next ingredient that we're going to talk about is repetition, repeat. Making sure that we frequently repeat utterances. And sometimes we do this with the focus stimulation approach, where we'll target certain core words or different language functions or phrases, but we also make sure when we use repetition to use variety, so we don't get stuck in the same phrase over and over. And some example might be our target word is go. So maybe one time we're saying I go, the next time we model I go again, and then the third time it's my turn to go. Still adding the target word of go, but giving a little more variety to it.
Yes, I think it is important. And, again, we've heard people say that, sometimes when individuals, communication partners, are learning how to model, they might get stuck in scripted phrases. We want to make sure that children are exposed to the true variety of language, and that includes us thinking of different ways to say things on occasion. Our next modeling ingredient is expanding. We want to repeat and rephrase the adult utterance by adding elements to provide a more complete expression of intended meaning. For example, I might start off by saying bath time, either because I can't find the words quickly enough to say them in the moment, or because I want to produce a shorter model so the child can focus on the keywords. But then I might expand and say, it's time for your bath. So again, I'm still using the words bath and time, but I'm producing an expanded utterance. And we can also build up the child's communication as well. So if the child uses a single word utterance such as bubble, we can expand on the comment to use 2 words. For example, oh, that's a big bubble. And then we'd model big and bubble, or blow the bubble, or the bubble popped. But we want to continue expanding to increase our clients' and students' length of utterance.
Our last ingredient that we're going to talk about today for modeling is stop. Giving that pause time to allow a child to respond. We know parallel talk is important. We understand we want to have repetition, but we don't want to be that device hog too, so we never give our child that opportunity to communicate.
And this is a great graphic on your screen. Wait expectantly. Sometimes silence is the best way to encourage AAC use. This is from Practical AAC, a really fabulous blog and resource for ideas surrounding AAC.
So when we talk about stop and when we're training teams and parents, we always talk about the what, why, and how of it. So we know what we're doing. We're going to stop and we're going to gaze expectantly at the child while doing so.
And why are we doing this? Well, students need time to process what we've said and then formulate a reply and motor plan a response. Our colleague Kathleen Post talks about the mental gymnastics that are required in order to be able to use augmentative communication. You know, when we're thinking of what we want to say, we don't have to think, is that under groups or is that under action words? We just retrieve it. But an individual who's using AAC has to think about what we've said, formulate a reply, and then try to figure out where it is on the communication device. And if they have any fine motor difficulties, plan a motor response. And that can all take time. And depending on the child, this can take anywhere from 5 to 30 seconds and sometimes longer. We must stop, pause expectantly to allow a child time to communicate. After all, that's why we're modeling in the first place. And sometimes I've heard people say, well, how are you, if you're modeling all the time, you know, then you're becoming a device hog. You're not allowing your child time to produce an utterance. And the expectant pause is exactly the way that, number one, we allow the child an opportunity to say something, but it also creates an invitation. See how awkward that expectant pause is? When I stop talking, people kind of start to wonder what happened. Whose turn is it to say something? That's a natural cue that it is the other person's turn in the conversation.
So let's talk about the how. How can we do this? Well, we can stop 3 different ways. We can stop before, we can stop during, or after a model to invite that child to take that conversational turn. So let's talk first about pausing before. So this way we're talking about, we're going to avoid anticipating those wants and needs or preempting. And even though we might think we know a child needs help or assistance, we're not going to do it. We're not going to anticipate. We're going to allow that child that opportunity to advocate for him or herself. If something's really desired and required, give that student the opportunity to initiate communication by pausing. And here's an example we can talk about with before. We can give that child an unopened juice box. Avoid talking or modeling and just look at them expectantly. Pause and wait, maybe 10 seconds, 20 seconds. You might gesture to ask for help, putting your hands on the box, juice box, or handing you the box, or even using his device to say help or open. And if he initiates using a gesture, remember, respect and reflect. If he doesn't initiate, then start your model. Help me, open juice.
The next place that we can pause is during a model. This is stopping and pausing between words to allow the student to finish the phrase or sentence. So an example of this is starting a sentence. I want to play, and then stop talking or modeling and look expectantly at the child. Pausing and waiting to see if the child finishes the sentence by adding a word, such as ball. If the child doesn't add a word, that's okay. We can finish modeling the sentence.
And the last way to stop how to is after. So if you're familiar with Weatherby and Prezant's idea of creating communication temptations, is that pausing after a model, we can produce a comment relative to available object or action to entice the child to initiate communication. So for example, you're sitting at snack time, you know your student ate a couple of his cookies and if there's nothing else on his plate, you can sit there and just maybe smell that cookie, maybe even take a bite, because that's why I love snack time. And after, maybe make a comment, stop talking, and maybe just look at that child expectantly. If after those 10 seconds, the child, before those 10 seconds, generates a response on his device, honor it, and maybe expand it. Maybe you just said more. So you can expand and say, eat more cookie. If not, just model the request.
So one of the things that Matt brought up when he was talking about before the pausing before or stopping before a model was something called preempting. And Stephen Calculator in his 1988 article talks about preempting and states that untrained conversational partners may inadvertently restrict the AAC user's needs and opportunities to communicate by anticipating their wants and needs to the point that communication is no longer necessary. And this can happen in a few different ways.
We can look at environmental preempting. The physical environment is arranged so it alleviates the need to communicate. A lot of times we walk into classrooms, even homes, and they are saying there's been a decrease in requests, or he's not requesting or not asking for things. Oh, because if you look around, everything's available. They can get it at any time. There is no need to ask for something.
Nonverbal preempting is when inaccessible materials, events, and activities are provided by others who anticipate the individual's wants and needs.
And verbal preempting. And this is something that we as SpeechPaths learn a lot about. And prompting, always asking questions, presenting choices, and instructing individuals to respond before they can initiate the message on their own.
Yes, I think that a lot of what we learn in speech pathology school, we learn different strategies for eliciting communication, but if we don't pause before we start asking questions, what do you want? Or presenting choices, cookies or pretzels, or instructing individuals to respond, tell me I want pretzels, before students can initiate messages on their own, we really eliminate the ability to be able to initiate communication. And again, when we do all these types of preempting, again, we may be having compliance rather than communication. Which brings me to a slide about prompting. And one of the things that we do know is that some children quickly become dependent on prompts and wait for an adult to provide that prompt before they make any type of response. While prompts are useful tools in teaching, it is important to use them thoughtfully.
Expectant pause allows that child time to respond to that stimulus occurring in the natural environment, and one in which typically developing peers typically use when performing a particular behavior.
And for communication, that is frequently a pause.
Using mnemonics has been really helpful to show us with able to recall information. Perhaps you guys remember the mnemonic for the planets, Mary's violet eyes, or one for the biological classification of living things, King Phillips comes over.
Or maybe for the cranial nerves, for those of you speech language pathologists out there.
And when we look at each of the ingredients we just talked about, it's really successful for us to be coming up a way to modeling it. And as we're going to discuss this evening, we're talking about with SMoRRES.
So each of the ingredients to successful modeling that we just discussed corresponds to a letter in the mnemonic SMoRRES. So S is for slow rate.
MO is for model.
R, the first R is for respect and reflect. And incidentally, we do know that SMoRRES doesn't have 2 R's, but this really worked well for us. Plus, our participants usually get to eat s'mores when they're learning about this.
The second R is for repeat.
E is for that expanding or building up.
And the last one we just talked about is for?
S, stop. Yeah, stop, or the expectant pause. So I know we just have a few moments left, but we wanted to actually try to show you a couple of models, video models, of both partner-augmented input in the classroom and also partner-augmented input at home. This first one is actually a music therapist who is working with a variety of children who use communication devices. She has a communication board up at the front where she's doing some modeling, but you'll see she also picks up a student's device and models on that during her session.
Play sticks. Yes, we're gonna play our sticks. Look, we're gonna play groups, music. You don't have sticks, so we say instruments. We're gonna play a musical instrument.
And you can see at the end of that video when she was navigating through the groups page, the music, she was looking for sticks but knew it wasn't there. So she did that descriptive teaching. She just said musical instrument, but she also talked about it. She said, you don't have it, but you can say musical instrument.
So nice use of some descriptive teaching when a fringe word wasn't on the communication device. She used the available vocabulary to model. In the next video clip, you'll actually see a mom and 2 daughters who are decorating eggs for Easter. And they think they heard the Easter egg crack. And so the mom is actually looking to model the word crack, but that is also not on the device. So she handles that by finding a synonym that was generously offered by the sister, and that was break.
Did questions look? Did you hear that? There's a couple of Did you hear that? Actions A to Z. I'm putting a green in you. Crack. Do we have crack? We've had a couple crackers. Yeah. You know what? What other word could we use besides crack? Break. Break. Yeah. Did you hear it? Break. Let's look. See how it looks. No, I thought it would have a break in it. Yeah.
Okay, and we very much want to thank 2 techie mamas who shared this video with us for the purpose of instruction. But you can see that in this case, you know, they're both at school and at home engaging in activities that would typically occur in the classroom or in the home, but are continuing to model augmentative communication and touching icons on the device as they're talking.
There's some resources we want to show you guys. The first one is the Partner-Augmented Input in the Classroom Facebook group. This group is for speech paths, educators, assistive technology specialists, or anyone that's in the schools working with children who use AAC. And really the idea is providing that staff instruction and partner-augmented input. The goal of this group is to provide a forum for sharing those resources, successes, as well as provide support for school teams who are facing implementation challenges when serving these students.
And we recently started another group, Partner-Augmented Input at Home. This closed Facebook group is for parents, adult siblings, grandparents, and other family members supporting AAC users at home through the use of Partner-Augmented Input. Because this is a closed group, answers to questions are required for membership approval. Some other resources that you might find handy when wanting to continue your learning about Partner-Augmented Input or in supporting the teams and families that you work with. We have a Partner-Augmented Input handout that is a 1-page double-sided handout. It is a free download on the Links and Downloads tab of the Technology and Language Center website, which can be found at talcaac.com.
Another resource we have is a video from the Infinitec online classroom. This video program takes school staff through portions of steps 1 through 5 of an evidence-based 8-step instructional model for teaching Partner-Augmented Input. This program covers the complete commitment to the instructional program, strategy description, some of the stuff we went through today, videotape strategy demonstration, verbal practice of the strategy steps, and some control practice. The streaming video is free to the schools that are part of the Infinitec Coalition. Infinitec serves districts in Illinois, Minnesota, Kansas, parts of Pennsylvania. Those that aren't listed in those states still can get this information if you visit the Technology and Language Center website.
And please do also check out some of the forms of social media. We do have a Partner-Augmented Input Pinterest page with lots of resources, articles, videos, as well as posters that can be hung at home or at school, as well as a YouTube channel that has videos, our websites we'd already mentioned. So please do stay in touch. And now we are ready to open up the floor to questions. Stephanie?
Thank you so much for all that great information. I think that we all really benefited from that. So we do have just a couple questions, and then I'm going to turn it over to Franklin for a couple minutes. The first question was a question regarding defining the word generatively when you were speaking about the child must be seeing the system used generatively. So what did you mean by that?
Well, we're coming up with spontaneous novel utterances, coming up with things as they're occurring in the natural environment, being able to produce language as it's occurring. So we kind of talked a little bit about this when we talked about parallel talk. Talk about what the child is seeing, thinking, hearing, doing, feeling as it's occurring in the moment.
Great, thank you. And then real quickly about the video clips you had shown, I'm not sure if those are available publicly anywhere, and if not, do you have any suggestions for where people could see video examples?
There's a variety of modeling ones if you just go into YouTube. I know Two Techie Mamas has a YouTube channel too that you can see some more samples of modeling that we have. Again, we also have the Infinitec video if you're in one of those states that has a lot of different versions of it.
And there are also video links on the Pinterest board, so you can find other videos. We know that video doesn't always display well in a webinar format. Some people who have lower bandwidth or slower streaming sometimes get a really pixelated video or don't see it very well, but we think it's so important to see it happening, to see the demonstration, in addition to hearing about it, to really get an idea of what we're talking about. So hopefully some of you were able to see it.
Great, thank you. I think we are running real close to time. One of the interesting questions that I saw was about eye gaze modeling, and I know that I've heard that question myself from other professionals. I'm not sure there's a quick way to respond to that, but if you had any quick suggestions to that question, and otherwise I can direct that question to you via email.
Sure. Well, eye gaze is still a form of direct selection, and it really is impossible because of the need for calibration and being in the correct spot to be able to model eye gaze modeling. And it's cost prohibitive to have a parallel eye gaze device to be able to model on. So when we're modeling on individuals' devices who use eye gaze, we frequently use direct selection with a finger.
Great. Thank you so much. So at this time, I'd like to turn it over to Franklin for a couple minutes, and then we will wrap up.
So thank you very much. On behalf of Isaac International, I'd just like to thank everyone for being present at tonight's webinar, and to thank our fabulous speakers and our wonderful moderator. And just quickly, just to let everyone know that registration for Conference 2018 is going absolutely gangbusters. We're thrilled to announce that it's shaping up to be an extremely a well-attended, very well-attended conference. We're looking forward to lots of countries being represented. So if you have not had a chance to register, please do so. As I said, registration, especially in the last week and a half, has literally been going really, really well. So we look forward to welcoming everyone on the Gold Coast this July. So I will turn it back, Stephanie, to you.
Thanks, Franklin. So again, thank you so much to Jill and Matthew for this informative hour, and thank you all for your participation. Make sure that you complete the evaluation at the website and in the email that you receive. We are really interested in your suggestions for future topics, so please reach out and let us know what you'd like to hear. Coming up in May, on May 7th at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, Dr. Richard Herdig will be with us talking about AAC in acute care, facilitating patient-provider communication and reducing risks. And then on June 5th at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, we'll be hearing from Amy Goldman and Sarah Blackstone discussing people who use AAC in emergencies and disasters, tales from the trenches. So please make sure to tune into those and join USSAAC to make sure you get the inside scoop on AAC in the United States. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.